Hey, sixth grade, I am so glad you are back for session 4. Amazing things are going to be happening. Tonight is your last time to be in your groups together. That is so sad, but also exciting that you've made it through this part of the semester. So, today's big question is, what is sin? Oh my gosh, this is such a church word that we throw around all the time. Sin. S-I-N. Sin. What is it? What does it mean? So we talked about the 5 C's of creation. Can anybody name them yet? Do you remember? Let's see. We start with creation, and then curved in, then covenant, Christ, church. One more time. Creation, curved in, covenant, Christ, and church. Say it with me now. Creation, curved in, covenant, Christ, church. You got it. So we did creation last week, and we learned all about those wonderful stories and how God created us good. Now, today's story, we're looking at that curved in. And remember, we talked about being curved in is not trusting who God says we are. Maybe we don't trust what God says we are because we think we are way cooler than anything and we could trust it all on our own, right? Or maybe we think we're not nearly as good as God is saying we are, and we're completely inadequate. We can't do any of this. Either way causes us to sin because we're not trusting who God is calling us to be. So sin, when we define that word, is really an action that causes a breakdown between relationships. Now, we cause those breakdowns when we don't trust in God. We cause those breakdowns in human relationships, in divine human relationships, in relationships between humans and creation. All of this damage to our relationships causes this separation, this alienation in our lives between us and God, us and others, and us and the world. That is what sin is. And we do this because we're curved in on ourselves. Now, the next story is filled with some wild events. A talking serpent, a worldwide flood, a huge boat full of all the animals in the world. Really elements beyond what we would consider normal, right? So it might be easy for us to be like, this is a fairy tale and just dismiss it. But like our first story, reality and metaphors are mixed together. A metaphor is a word or phrase that's used as a symbol, a word or a phrase that's used as a symbol to describe something. So if the Bible is full of these metaphors, well then, is any of it true? The answer is yes. Remember, we talked about how God inspired, breathed in through the Bible. And the great thing about metaphors and stories is that they help us connect by opening our eyes to the deeper meaning. There's a quote that I want to share with you. It's from a guy named Mark Miller, and he wrote a book called Experiential Storytelling. And here's what he says about storytelling in metaphors. He says this: storytelling is powerful because it has the ability to touch human beings at the most personal level, while facts are viewed from the lens of like a microscope, right? Stories are viewed with the lens of the soul. Stories address us on every level. They speak to the mind, the body, the emotions, the spirit, the will. In a story, a person can identify with the situations that he or she has never been in. And then the individual's imagination is unlocked to dream what could previously be unimaginable. I want you to take a moment and think about, why do you think stories affect us on that deeper level? Take 30 seconds in your group to answer that. When we were told a good story, we don't just hear it, we see it and we feel it. It affects us. It's like we're putting on a special pair of glasses And those special pair of glasses cause us to step inside the story. And it stirs up really important questions within us about who we are and what we believe about life. You see, stories, especially stories from the Bible, have the power to shape our lives. Stories from the Bible, these stories that are inspired, breathed in from God, can shape our lives because the Holy Spirit comes along beside us and breathes into us what God wants us to hear from these stories. And that is huge and powerful. So, for today's story, I want us to gather around our campfire again. Here I have mine, and I've done a lot of videos today, so it's been burning a little while. It smells really good in my office. So light your candle, get your crayons and your paper out to write or draw anything that stands out to you from the story, okay? And know that everybody's going to share one thing that stood out to them from the story after our video is done. So be thinking about what stands out to you. Sometimes when I'm listening to a story, my mind will hear something and then it starts to wander off. Usually we think that's not a good idea, but when we're listening to Bible stories, sometimes that's good. And what we should do is notice that part of what did we hear in the story that made our mind start going. Write that down, draw that picture. If you missed the rest of the story, you can watch the video again sometime, but then you can really be like, oh, maybe God was telling me something about this particular piece. And we'll talk about the whole story afterwards. So if you get that piece, that's amazing. Somebody else is going to hear something else, and that's okay. So let's dive into our first story for today. Life disrupted. Last week, we heard that Adam and Eve were living in the garden under God's care. It was beautiful, and God was protecting them. You see, but one day, this clever serpent came up to Eve and asked her, "Did God really say that you can eat anything from any fruit in this garden?" And Eve said, "Well, yeah, we can eat any fruit we'd like except for the tree of the knowledge, except for that tree. God said if we were to eat the fruit from that tree or even touch it, we'll die." And the serpent replied, "Eve, you won't die. God knows that if you eat that fruit, your eyes are going to be opened. And you will become wise like God." Eve looked at the delicious fruit and thought, this will make me wise? So she bit into the fruit. And then Adam, who was standing right there listening to this whole conversation, she said, "Do you want to have some too?" Adam ate it. He ate it too. And when they did this, their eyes were instantly opened and they felt ashamed because for the first time, they were afraid. And they realized that they should cover up their nakedness. So they tied some leaves together, covered themselves up. Later on, so in the cool of the day, God came to spend some time with Adam and Eve. And when Adam and Eve heard God coming, walking in the garden, they hid behind some bushes. And they were hiding there, and they heard God call out to them, "Where are you, Adam, Eve? I'm here. I want to hang out." And Adam called back, "I heard you were coming. I was ashamed because I'm naked. So I hid." God said, "Why are you ashamed of being naked? Did you eat the fruit I told you not to eat?" Adam said, "It was the woman. She gave me the fruit." God asked Eve, "Okay, Eve, why did this happen?" And Eve answered, "It was the serpent. He tricked me into eating the fruit." So God said to the serpent, "You've done this. And now, serpents, you are going to be slithering on your bellies, eating dust. Humans will now be your enemies." God turned to Adam and Eve and said, "Your eyes have been opened now to pain, struggles, death. You're going to face intense childbirth. You'll struggle through the weeds and thorns to harvest your food, and you'll fight for control of your relationships. And at the end of the life, you'll return to the ground from which you were created." After that, God used animal skins to make clothing for Adam and Eve. And then God removed them from the garden. And mighty angels were stationed at the entrance with flaming swords, keeping Adam and Eve from returning to the garden and eating from the tree of life. Scene 2, starting over. So after leaving the garden, Adam and Eve started a family. Now, tragically, their oldest son, Cain, he attacked and killed their younger son, Abel, because Cain had this jealous rage. Even after God warned Cain about his jealous anger. And Cain was sent away to be a wanderer of the earth. And as humans started populating the earth, civilizations formed. Cities were built, craftsmanship, music, the arts emerged. But humans, we couldn't live peacefully with one another. Selfishness, greed turned into fighting. And fighting turned into hatred, and hatred turned into murder, and murder turned into war. Violence and chaos spiraled out of control, and people's hearts and minds were filled with evil day and night. Humans have forgotten that they were created in God's image. And guys, God's heart was broken. Can't see that at all. Much better. Scene 2, starting over. So after having to leave the garden, Adam and Eve started a family. And yet, tragically, their oldest son, Cain, well, he killed his brother Abel in a jealous rage. And, even though God warned Cain about his anger, Cain was just too upset and he did. And then Cain was sent away to wander the earth. You see, as the human population started to grow, civilizations were formed, cities were built, craftsmen, music, arts, all of that great stuff emerged, but humans could not live peacefully. Selfishness and greed just turned into fighting, and fighting turned into hatred. Hatred turned into murder, murder turned into war, and violence and chaos got out of control. Just kept spiraling. People's hearts and their minds were just filled with evil day and night. And humans forgot that they were created in God's image, created for good, right relationship. And God's heart was broken. So God said to the humans have made me regret that I created them. I got to start over. Whew. Now there was one man, Noah, and his family, who still followed God's ways. And so God gave Noah this plan to protect his family and to save each creature on the earth. So Noah built this big boat called an ark, and Noah put each kind of creature on to the ark, and Noah carefully followed all of God's instructions and built the large boat. And when it was finished, he put I already said this. So God gave Noah a plan to protect his family, to save each kind of creature on earth. And Noah followed God's instructions so closely. And he built this large boat called an ark. And when it was finished, Noah put on pairs of each kind of animals. And then suddenly the water burst up from the ground, and it poured down from the sky. And raindrops did not stop for 40 days. 40 days. The water just kept rising higher and higher and higher until it covered even the tallest mountains. And life was just decimated. But Noah and his family and all the animals, they were safe, floating on the ark on the surface of the water. After many months, God stirred up this wind that blew across the waters and caused them to recede, and the land started coming back, and the ark landed safely on the mountainside. And Noah and his family, they stepped out onto that damp, muddy ground. And God said, even though humans will still rebel, I promise never to flood the earth again. God said, my love for you will never change. My promises to you will never be broken. And at that moment, the sun broke through all the storm clouds and formed this spectrum of colors across the sky, a rainbow. From then on, even to today, whenever we see that rainbow in the sky, it's a reminder from God and to all creation that God promises a new beginning, and a promise to be in relationship with us. Man, I hate this story. Next time, when we're with our parents, we're going to talk about how God keeps these promises and makes more promises to us, and what God's going to do now that God says, I can't start over again. I'm going to work with these people and make it work. What's God going to do? We've covered creation, curved in. Next up is covenant. I'll see you next time. Here's some bonus information here's some bonus information for the leaders. And maybe if you want to play this for your kids too, that's fine. I am super hot because I've been making videos all day and this candle and these lights. But okay, Cain and Abel's story and Adam and Eve. I want to point out a couple things. Notice how Eve and Adam, both of them, their sin was wanting to be like God, and that they trusted the serpent more than they trusted who God said they were. Because God said that they were very good. God created them and loved them and was walking and was in relation close to them, but they couldn't trust it. So instead, they trusted their own desires to want to be like God, and they ate the fruit. And the serpent just kind of nudged them. And that's all it took for them to be like, yeah, I want to do this. You're right. I can be my own God. I don't have to trust God. I don't have to trust who God's created me to be. Don't we do that? Yeah. That's what I want you guys to point out to your kids, is that we do this too. We don't trust who God's created us to be, and that's what gets us in trouble. The other thing in the second story, you can notice, Cain and Abel. Cain didn't trust that his gift to God was as deserving as Abel's, and kind of God liked Abel's more, so Cain got super jealous. Some say that the Cain and Abel story is actually when sin really appeared and was the first real sin. I'm not so much in that camp, but I think that's an interesting thing to think about. Also, in the Noah story, there's a great Bible verse about, I'll put it in the lesson plan, about how everything was chaos and evil. Like, it got that bad. Like, all these chapters, I think we're in like 3 of Genesis up to 12 where we get Abraham starting. It just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until you get to Noah, and then everything is chaos, and so God wipes it out. Now, the good news in this story is that Noah's the promise God made to Noah, right? That God's not ever going to say, I'm done with you, I'm starting over, right? God saved Noah, and God says, I'm not going to do that again. That was not a good choice. And so God makes this promise with the rainbow to never flood the earth again. And this promise to do something new and work with humans and this sin problem, this separation we have from God in a new way. And that's what we're going to start talking about when we start talking about covenant. And we're going to spend a lot of time on covenant because it's like the rest of the Old Testament. But it'll be good. It's great. So I can't wait to do that. Email me any questions, and I'll see you next time.